Why everything is so expensive and why it won't go back down. Most people think prices went up because of COVID, war, or greedy companies. That sounds logical, but it's wrong. Because the real reason everything is expensive today is the same reason it will stay expensive tomorrow. And once you understand how the money system actually works, you'll see why working harder, saving more, or waiting for prices to fall doesn't fix it. If you feel like your salary is going nowhere, your rent keeps rising, and even basic life feels unaffordable, it's not in your head. You are inside a money system that quietly loses value over time. And once you see the pattern, everything makes sense. Most people believe prices rise because companies get greedy. But if greed were the cause, prices would rise randomly. Some things would get cheaper, others would get more expensive. That's how competition works. But that's not what we see. We see everything rising together. Food, rent, energy, houses, cars, even coffee. When everything rises at once, it isn't a pricing problem, it's a money problem. So where does money actually come from? Most people think it comes from governments printing physical bills. But in modern economies, almost all money is digital, and almost all of it is created by banks. When you take out a mortgage, a car loan, or a credit card, the bank does not give you existing money. It creates brand new money on a computer. Imagine if you could type 200,000 pounds into your bank app, and suddenly it became real spendable money. That is effectively what a bank does when it approves a loan. Every loan creates new money. Every repayment destroys it. That is how money enters the economy, through debt. This is where inflation really comes from. When more money exists, everything priced in that money becomes more expensive. And when governments and central banks want the economy to grow, they encourage borrowing. They lower interest rates. They make loans cheap. They push banks to lend. More loans mean more money. More money means higher prices. That is inflation. Now, here is the part no one tells you. Once a system becomes dependent on debt, it cannot stop creating money. Because if borrowing slows down, the entire financial system starts to crack. Banks stop lending. Businesses can't expand. People lose jobs. Property prices fall. Stock markets crash. We saw this in 2008. When credit froze, banks collapsed, governments stepped in, and trillions of new money was created to keep the system alive. We saw it again in 2020. When lockdown shut down the economy, central banks created more money in 2 years than in the previous 100. That money didn't disappear. It stayed in the system, and prices are still adjusting to it. So governments choose inflation because the alternative is a total collapse of the banking system. They choose the lesser of two evils, and you are paying the price. This is why assets rise faster than wages. When new money enters the system, it does not go to everyone equally. It flows first to banks, corporations, and people who already own assets. They borrow cheaply. They buy houses. They buy shares. They buy land. Prices rise. Only later does that money reach workers through wages. By then, everything already costs more. It works like a champagne tower. New money is poured into the top glass, banks and asset owners, and only what overflows reaches the glasses below. By the time it reaches you, prices have already gone up. That's why it feels like you're always behind. Nowhere is this more obvious than housing. When interest rates are low, people can borrow more. When people can borrow more, they can bid more. So house prices rise, then rents rise, because landlords have higher mortgages. This is not just about supply and demand. It's about how much money banks are willing to create for property. Housing became expensive because money became cheap. Wages don't keep up with this, because wages move slowly. They depend on contracts, company budgets, and productivity. Asset prices move instantly because they are fueled by credit. So even when your salary increases, houses, shares, and rents usually rise faster. That's not an accident. That's how the money system is designed. People think prices will come back down. They won't. For prices to fall, money would need to disappear. Debt would need to be repaid. Credit would need to shrink. That would crash the system. So instead, inflation continues quietly. Your savings lose value. Your rent rises. Your groceries cost more. Year after year. This doesn't mean you're powerless, but it does mean you need to understand the rules of the system you're living in. Because once you see how money actually works, you stop making the mistakes that keep most people stuck. In a system where money loses value every year, the worst place to store wealth is in cash. Not because cash disappears, but because it quietly buys less and less over time. If inflation runs at 5%, your money loses half its purchasing power in about 14 years. That means what costs $100 today will cost $200 tomorrow. And nothing about that requires prices to go crazy. It happens slowly, quietly, invisibly. That's why people think they're getting poor, even when their salary is going up. Now compare that to assets. Assets are things that do not multiply when money is printed. A house does not double just because a central bank creates new money. A business does not magically reproduce. Gold does not grow on trees. Shares represent ownership of real companies. So when more money enters the system, those things get bid up. Not because they changed, but because the money did. That's why assets protect you from inflation. They sit on the other side of the money flow. This is why the wealthy hold real estate, businesses, shares, and gold. Not because they are smarter, but because they are positioned inside the money system instead of being crushed by it. They don't hold wealth in cash that gets diluted. They hold wealth in things that cannot be printed. This is also why debt works differently for different people. For someone without assets, debt is dangerous. It eats income. It creates stress. It traps you. But for people who own assets, cheap debt is powerful because they borrow money that loses value to buy things that rise in value. That's how the system rewards people who understand it. And this is the shift most people never make. They think the game is about working harder, saving more, budgeting better. But the real game is about where money flows, who gets it first, and what loses value when new money is created. Once you understand that, you stop chasing money and start positioning yourself. That is what MoneyOS is about. Not hype, not get rich quick, but understanding the operating system that runs the global economy so you can stop guessing and start seeing. If this finally made things make sense, subscribe to the channel. Because in the next videos, I'll break down how banks create money, why housing is broken, how debt really works, and how the system moves wealth from people who don't understand it to people who do. Once you understand the operating system of money, you stop playing blind